counselor Christian and have been, my life has been changed because of some of the deep spiritual wisdom. He brings a unique perspective of a handful of different faith traditions together, all rooted primarily in his belief as a Christian, but particularly he has grown up in and around and informed by the Franciscans, which are kind of a sect outside of Catholicism, if you will, and did some work living in Nicaragua for a little while. And so we are blessed to have you with us today. And Doug, he is a practicing clinician and a Christian, and so we thought what better way to wrap up this series. So with no further ado, I'll get out of the way for you.
Well, it's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Pastor Smith, for inviting me. It's an honor. And as I was reflecting on our time together this morning, I thought of a million different directions. Each one would be too long. And so what I'm going to try to do, my goal is that when we walk out of here and we go throughout our day, that you remember at least 2 or 3 points. And these won't be just points that, I hope, these won't be just points that are interesting, but rather things that you and I can put in practice in the immediacy of our lives, in the immediacy of our relationships. And I was asked by Pastor Smith if I wanted to preach on a certain reading, and I did say the Beatitudes. Interestingly, I remember learning and being surprised by the following, and that is, they've done some questions throughout the United States, I think actually throughout the world, on the most preached on areas of the Bible. The Beatitudes are the least preached upon in the entire world. And I think it's because we don't really know what to do with all the blesseds and the poors and the mourns and the meeks and the righteousness and the mercifuls, and what does it all mean and how do we apply it? I think there are lots of different valid ways to unpack some of these thoughts, the Beatitudes. They really are challenging. They really are transformational. But because I love the nexus between spirituality and psychology, what I thought I would do is to try to unpack a little bit here in terms of mental health, especially given that that has been a theme that Pastor Smith has led everybody on here. And I've been a therapist for 23 years, and I've got to say that the greatest distance anybody could ever travel is not from here to China or Africa. It's not upside any kind of mountain. It's not in any books, typically, that we might read to try to find ourselves or make sense of maybe some chaos in our life. Rather, the farthest distance we could ever travel is between the head, conceptual mind, and the heart. Maybe it's a foot, I don't know. That's the hardest part. And it's really hard because it's not modeled for us. And when I can apply what I'm about to say, hopefully you'll be able to follow me as I try to unpack these particular scripture. If I can apply, I think, the heart, that journey from the head to the heart, if I can apply that well, you're going to see why it's hard. And you're going to see why it's a road less traveled, if you will. One that many people, including myself, would rather not do and would rather try to find some kind of peace or joy or happiness in other ways. but indeed it is always present. This pathway to the heart is always present. And so we're going to dive in with this idea: the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are the meek. I mean, who wants to be meek? And what does this mean about righteousness and the hunger and thirst for it all? May I submit here that the poor in spirit are those aspects inside of you, inside of me, inside of our parents, inside of our family, inside of our country. Those aspects inside of us that are unknown, unacknowledged, unexamined. They're poor because they're kind of like the marginalized of society on the side of the road begging for attention in some way. They're unacknowledged because oftentimes they're painful. This is not to throw anybody under the bus. We're all, if you will, broken. And we're all whole. You see? But in order for us to become more whole, or could I say holy, you see what I did there? Holiness is actually a path of integration. It's not doing things perfectly. Holiness is a path to integrate these parts that are marginalized inside of us. That's what makes a holy person whole. And I think that a lot of our division that is outside in the external world cannot ever be touched, reconciled, or healed until we acknowledge that if we're going to scapegoat, point fingers at, quote, those people, we at least have to have one hand pointing here too. Like that. And what I mean by this is the things that we don't like about other people are often the very things that we are unaware of inside of ourselves. The anger that we see out in the world, anger, strength, power, those are the things that we easily can surmise when we turn on the news or look at whatever app we have that tell us the news, who's fighting, and all of that, and how we end it all. That's often the question: is how can we heal some of this? And I'm just going to say, actually, it's as easy and as hard as literally you and me today traveling from here to here, because you're the poor in spirit right now, and so am I. That there's parts of me that I don't know yet, and there's parts of me that I've pushed down. Those parts of me, those memories of me, want to be acknowledged, maybe forgiven, maybe healed, maybe welcomed. Parts of me that I don't want to see, can I welcome them to the banquet of my heart, like Jesus welcomed the sinners and the poor? So I'm especially going to address the men here as a man, myself, because it is harder for men. But you know what? In the Western world, I think women too are just about as equal in this. When I see couples in counseling, there's a lot of anger. Of course there is. And hurt and misunderstanding. or especially when I see men who come in to my office. Oftentimes, the thing that presents most readily is anger. Why? Well, that's because in our Western society, anger is okay. Sort of natural for men to be angry. Sort of natural for all of us to say, well, I don't like that. That's wrong. Something's got to change. You know, those kinds of things. The anger that we have, especially men, is only the top layer. In fact, you might even say it's not even the marginalized or poor yet inside of you. What you see us expressing, this anger, the resentment, that's just the top layer. We're not even getting to the poor part. We're not even getting to the blessed are those who mourn. We're not even getting to the area of mourning. We're not even getting to merciful or pure in heart. You don't even get to those areas through concepts. You only get to the pure of heart inside of you, inside of me, the merciful. You only get to those things through the layer of anger. Because, and this is something that I don't think it's in any psychology book unless I write one, which, maybe that's something I'll do. But I'd like to offer you a skin of human suffering. Just like you and I have skin on our bodies, and there's layers of skin. There's the dermis, the epidermis, there's different layers. I would like to offer you a thought that maybe there's layers of this pain that causes our human suffering. And if we can go through those layers, we are going to get to the poor in you and in me today, not tomorrow, and not in anybody else. And we're going to be able to mourn because we'll be able to recognize. The first layer is anger. I'm talking the most external layer. You might consider it the hair on my arm. I'm kind of hairy. Maybe if you're not hairy, then just pretend you had hair. That was trying to be funny. You're absorbing. Well, you have a hairy, yeah. So just imagine Pastor Smith's face. They laughed at that. This would be anger. That's apparent. It is validated, and it forms community. We can be angry together and point fingers. Feels kind of good to be in a community when we're all grieving or having grievances. But I guarantee you it's the top layer. And when I'm with men, I automatically know there's two more layers below, and they don't know. And women too. Because below anger, and just try it out in your own life if you don't believe me, is below that is shame. And if you're familiar with Brene Brown, maybe some of you are, hero of mine, fellow clinical social worker, so she's cool. She defines shame as the intensely painful feeling that I am unworthy of love and belonging. Shame. And the sadness that goes along with shame. And it's often our families of origin. I'm not throwing anybody under the bus, but many of our generations have never learned how to process anger and get into the shame that I wasn't fully loved well, maybe, by my family of origin. that I sort of felt like I had to earn it. Or I knew when I wasn't fitting in because I was told by my family in some way, if you want to belong here, you have to be a certain way. That sticks, this belonging, this feeling of not belonging, and thus not feeling worthy of love. Even if we've been married for a long time, this is hard. And we point fingers because we feel angry about that when we don't acknowledge it. So we point fingers elsewhere and say, you don't belong to us. But below shame, deeper still, harder still to find, is fear. Fear is the root layer. Fear. And it's a fear that I am fundamentally flawed. It is a fear that there is no way that I can get out of my brokenness. There is no way to feel whole. It's a fear that however miserable or in some ways challenging my life might be, that it's going to be like that forever. It's a fear that I am separated, that I'm alienated, that I'm lonely, and that's it. No one will ever see me. Now, I'm going to honestly say that fear is holy. I know that sounds weird, but it's holy because it's the exact thing that allows us, if we have the courage, and by the way, courage means from the heart, cur, Latin, heart. Courage means to dig down when you are angry, when I am angry, before we express that anger, ask ourselves for just a second, in what ways do I feel shameful or feel sad that I need to grieve? How is the situation that I'm in right now that's making me angry kind of similar to how it was when I was 7 or even earlier, or I saw in my parents that I couldn't dress in because I didn't have the power, but it's emerging now in my life? Can you ask yourself, pause for a few seconds there, and just trust that there's fear there too, below that. We're all fearful. And it's okay. Fear is not bad. I know Jesus said, be not afraid. Be not afraid. But I'd like to submit here that some scripture scholars offer this interpretation. Jesus was saying in Aramaic something to the effect that we might say today is, be not afraid of being afraid. How about that? Because if we're not supposed to be afraid because Jesus said it, well, then he's already showing that he wasn't doing his own work, because he was afraid in the Garden of Gethsemane, if you recall. Sweating, blood. Very afraid. Take this cup from me, he said. But if it's your will, I'll do it. So how about this? Be not afraid of being afraid. It's okay. And it's through our fear, when we can acknowledge it, it's through our shared shame of feeling like we don't belong. And those things, if we can start looking at that, then we actually become less angry. Because we start to see ourselves from a more holistic perspective. Holy perspective. And I would argue that Jesus Christ, if you just want to play a little game in your head, think of it this way, is when you hear Jesus Christ or when you see his works in the Bible described, think of it in terms of wholeness made manifest. That's what Jesus did, is he took things that seemed like it was broken and he brought them together into wholeness. That's called reconciliation. And you and me, if you want to be some kind of change agent in this world that Christ in you starts healing the world. Christ has no body now but yours and mine. No hands, no feet on earth but yours. That's coming from St. Catherine of Siena, the Catholic saint who wrote that poem. The idea is when you and I have the courage, the heart moving down into the heart, courage to become vulnerable to ourselves, and we can start healing, bringing in those marginalized, those poor, those parts that want to be mourned. And why are you blessed then? Why would you be happy, as Pat said? Well, it's because once you can recognize those parts inside of you, inside of me, inside of the inner life, once you can do that, you really are set free. Because then you're not afraid of being broken anymore, because you already know. And you're not going to project all of that brokenness, that unacknowledged brokenness and pain. You're not going to project that onto the other. And all of a sudden, family life really starts to look like the kingdom of heaven in its wholeness. Jesus Christ really starts to make a lot of sense when you think of the power of wholeness coming inside of us and inside of our families, inside of our communities. So I'll end by just inviting all of us, if I could, to do one thing today, and that is try to attend to your immediate gut reactions as you talk to people, as you eat dinner together, or anything that comes up in our life that makes us feel like we're having a reaction, kind of a sense of resentment or anger. If you can do that, you've already solved 90% of it, and that is just to catch those feelings as they emerge. And then try to ask yourself, where is the shame below this anger? Just pause. Where might be the fear? And in that exact moment, when you're able to just say, where is it? Then bring your intention to Jesus and say, something like what I do, because I'm broken. Maybe you're more holy than I am. I mean, you're Methodist, I'm Catholic, so I have a long way to go. They laughed at that one. Say something like the light of Christ, which is the wholeness of light. I mean, can you imagine how whole that is? The luminosity of wholeness. Light of Christ, shine in me. These parts inside of me that have been dark, and because I haven't been willing or able to see the brokenness. And then you can say, like the Roman soldier who asked Jesus to heal his daughter, Lord, I believe you can help me heal. Help my unbelief. Help my unbelief. And if you simply do that, you intend, even if you don't know how, but you intend this kind of integration, that's pretty much all Jesus needs. And then all of a sudden, you, like Paul, can say, no longer I, but Christ who lives within me is healing my inner life, healing the way that I interact with my family, my wife, my husband, my kids, healing that, and healing the way that I interact with things that made me angry even yesterday. Because, brothers and sisters, that's how we're going to change the world. And it starts the journey here into here. Thank you.
Christ invited everybody